What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In the shop, we got a buddy of mine's 2016 Dodge Ram 1500 with a 5.7. I'm going to make a couple of videos for you. It needs a bit of work, so I'm going to go over front brakes, back brakes, wheel bearing, and outer tie rod. Pretty straightforward stuff, but I'm going to show you guys how to do it step by step. This video in particular is pertaining to a wheel bearing. We're going to start by setting it up on the hoist and ripping our wheel off. Alright, right on, people. So here we are, we're in the right front corner of this Dodge. I just wrapped up the tie rod and the brakes on the left side. So we're moving to this corner and I'm going to show you from scratch. But if you want to see how to do brakes or a tie rod, watch my other videos. So, how we're going to do this is, after you take the wheel off, if you're not doing brakes, you have the option to take off the 2 bolts for your caliper holder. Caliper holder only. You don't need to take off the caliper, just the caliper holder bolts, and then suspend the caliper, pads, and everything together aside, okay, for the job. But because I'm doing brakes, I'm going to start from the top and take off those bolts as well. Those are 2 13 millimeters. By the way, I'm going to take my caliper, rest it aside, pull my pads out. I don't need them. Sometimes, you know what? I'll be honest with you, pro tip, if you don't have a hammer, just grab something nearby. Just kidding, that's not a pro tip. That's a rookie tip, but it works. So, next up, this is what you guys can do if you're not changing your brakes. Take off the 2 bolts that take care of your caliper holder. Set that aside. Slip off your rotor. If your rotor is seized, I would not be surprised. Don't be shy to give it a hit with a hammer, but do not hit this part of the rotor for obvious reasons. Hit here, because that's where it's seized and you don't want to damage the face of your rotor. Unless, of course, you're changing it, then who really cares? So, next up, big axle nut. For that, I'm going to grab my 36 mil socket. And as you can hear, my gun was working hard. Yours might work hard too, so don't be alarmed. Now I'm gonna say this might be a challenging part of the job, but behind here you have 3 bolts, okay? 3 21 millimeter head bolts. 1, 2, and 3. Problem is, the CV axle gets in the way a little bit. So you're gonna wanna make sure you're on there properly. For me, I'm using a 21 mil flex impact socket. You might not have this, but you have to find something that's just gonna work for you and make sure you don't slip off. Because if you slip off or if you round the head of the bolt, you're just gonna make a problem for yourself for nothing. So hopefully this works for me and doesn't create an issue. Let's give it a go. All right, she's cracked loose. I can finish that one off another way. Now what I'm actually also going to recommend to make our lives a little bit easier to get access to those bolts is take this nut off, which is a 21 mil. You can use a ratchet, should come off pretty easily. Once you have it off, tap on it here. Again, it's only aluminum, so be careful. Now, what the purpose of that is. Now we could lift this and pull this knuckle out more, which in turn, we can push the axle back further. What that does for us is it allows us to get better access to the bolts and not have to fight. So one nut will save you a lot of grief on the rest of the job. So try to do that for yourself. Continue by getting the other 2 bolts out. which are also, again, 21 mil head bolts. And you might need to rotate the wheel for the other one. I called it a wheel, but there are no wheels. So what I meant to say was rotate the knuckle. Now our axle is pretty much right out of it. And it's right out of our way. So I'm sorry for blocking the camera. But that last bolt is out. Now, I don't know if yours comes with a sensor. So if it doesn't, be very careful. But mine does. So I don't really care to be careful. Pop it off from its fastening locations. And to be honest, I would recommend doing this anyways, because then you can just take it to the bench and take the sensor out of your bearing at that point there. Right? Now we have full access here. Okay? So we have our 3 bolts out, we have our connector out, we are ready to persuade this little bastard to separate from the knuckle. And that may or may not be the fun part. Alright, now what I've actually done quickly is I just put this knuckle back on underneath the ball joint here, the upper control arm, loosely, just for the purpose of kind of supporting it all square. Because what we're going to need to do next is actually use my favorite tool. It's called an air hammer. I'm sure you've seen it before. We're going to attempt to rotate this in the knuckle housing, and then it'll fall off easy. So plug your ears a little bit here. Well, as you can see, she's being stubborn. This has been in here since day one, and it's in dire need of being changed. But now we have something that is seized in our knuckles, so we have to be careful. At this point, I would start, if I were you, to spray some penetrant and see if it can creep in behind the bearing. I'm going to go straight to the heat because I have it accessible to me. If you have heat accessible to you, grab that now. Okay, here's an underrated pro tip. Make sure you grab your cool kid glasses so you could look cool when you're older and not blind. So fire in the hole. Now we're applying heat to the knuckle, not necessarily to the bearing. The reason is heat expands metal, and because the bearing is inside the knuckle, we want to expand the knuckle itself. Now, when you're heating up aluminum, you gotta be really careful because it doesn't give you as much warning as steel does. So start slow, don't go too crazy. And let's give it a shot. You don't want to end up cracking your knuckle. Oh yeah! Success of a love story. Alright, so because prep work is very important, obviously we don't want to be putting a new bearing on this shit. Am I allowed to swear on YouTube? I don't even know. Anyway, on this doo-doo. So, you want to clean this up. Also, watch your axle. Don't mess it up. Don't hit the boot. Just be very careful. You don't want to have to buy yourself a CV axle. Now, as usual, my favorite step. You want to add some lube or anti-seize, whatever you got. Also, you want to clean your backing plate. Again, nothing crazy. just so there's no heavy spots, any big burrs, so you don't have trouble with that. All right. Now again, it goes on like this. The disc goes away from it, the line goes over here, your caliper goes over here. All right, like so. All right, I'm going to go ahead and proceed with putting my bearing into, rather my sensor, into my shield. And yes, I recommend using the shield. It keeps debris away from the inside of your brakes and just helps keep everything a lot cleaner for next time you're in here. All right, so you got that on, right? Everything's good. What I'm going to recommend you do is take this nut back off so you can get access to those bolts easier. Let's go ahead and do that. Watch your bearing doesn't just fall out when you pull it forward now. Because it is service and it should move freely. And let's start putting our bolts in. I always like to start everything by hand. Alright, once you've started everything by hand, now you can go ahead, gun them on. Now once we've got our bolts nice and tight, make sure your shaft is passed through on the splines. And we'll put our bumper control arm back in place. It's just spinning the ball joint, so you need to compress it in order for it to be held. Now I ran out of real estate because my socket is not deep enough. So we're going to go at it again. Okay. And that's nice and tight. Our bearing's nice and tight. Throw on our axle line. If you're buying quality stuff, it should come with a new nut. Get our big socket here again. You're gonna torque that by hand. I highly recommend it because you want to add proper bearing preload to the bearing. Too much, it's gonna be too tight, you're gonna wear it. Too little, it's gonna be flopping around, you're gonna wear it. So it's just gotta be proper. All right, I'll put that in the description. And that's pretty much it, guys. It's not really intimidating. You saw the hurdle I had with it being seized in the knuckle. It's a very likely problem you're gonna come across, so I hope I was able to show you how to get around that and through that. But I'm gonna go ahead and put new brakes on. So I'm not gonna bore you to death on putting new brakes on, servicing and this and that. If you wanna see how that is done, I just made another video on the new brakes for the other side, so please watch that. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward job, and I hope you were able to learn something. So that's how you do a bearing on a 16 Dodge Ram 1500. So like, subscribe, and always remember, full throttle or no throttle.